Merci beaucoup, Jean-Sébastien.
Thanks very much, Jean-Sébastien. Good afternoon, everyone.
Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, the Minister of Transport, Omar Al-Gabra, and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health, Jennifer O'Connell.
Since the beginning of the pandemic, my team of ministers and I have been working very closely with their partners and teams. As a member of the cabinet, I regularly see that federal public servants are highly dedicated and competent. I get to see their work every day. During these difficult and uncertain times, federal public servants have gone above and beyond to offer critical services to Canadians at an unprecedented speed.
Became readily available. Public servants stepped up yet again with their arms out among the many Canadians who have already been fully vaccinated. That is so important because we continue to face more transmissible and more dangerous variants of concern. Les autorités de santé.
Public health authorities continue to tell us that vaccines are by far the very best way to put this pandemic behind us. We all know it. That's why today we're announcing that we will be requiring vaccination within the public service, the federal public service.
Vaccines are the best way to end this pandemic. That is why we are announcing today that we will require vaccinations in the federal public service. Et nous lançons un appel à.
We are also calling on all federally regulated industries and sectors, and we are also calling on Crown corporations and federal agencies to follow suit post-haste. The Government of Canada is the largest employer in the country. As such, the Government of Canada wants to do its part to protect public servants and the communities in which they live and work, both in Canada and abroad.
Aussi d'encourager.
We also, with this move, want to set a strong example for others by acting as leaders federally in the sectors that we regulate. These efforts and actions aim to help Canada reach the vaccine coverage that we need in order to reopen the economy, in order to keep the economy rolling, and in order to protect the millions of unvaccinated people who are vulnerable to COVID-19. We are focusing both on the public health of Canadians and on supporting economic resiliency in Canada. The next step will be to mobilize and engage with our main partners, notably bargaining agents and unions. We have worked side by side with them throughout the entire pandemic. We are working with them and with other partners to finalize the details of this very strong federal vaccination approach. We will study and look into the ways to implement this requirement through proof of vaccination and through other protecting tools, if necessary.
To get this right, but we will also act very quickly. The next step is obviously to engage our key stakeholders, including unions, bargaining agents, to build the details of this strong, mandatory federal vaccination plan. We are targeting implementation early this fall, and we will obviously communicate the details as this work unfolds, but this work begins immediately. The Government of Canada has a large workforce and a large reach to help in the fight against COVID-19. It is both our opportunity, but also our duty to lead by example. Nous avons le devoir.
It is our duty to guarantee the safety of our employees and those they serve, as well as to protect their communities. And that is exactly what we're doing through this announcement today. I thank you.
To turn over the microphone to my friend and colleague, the Minister of Transport, Omar Alghabra. Omar.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Bonjour à tous. I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Canadians have demonstrated strength and resilience throughout the pandemic and have shown extraordinary commitment to following public health advice. Canada's vaccination rate is among the best in the world. But to protect ourselves and each other from the virus and its variants, we must do better. We need to reach as many Canadians as we possibly can. Today, we are announcing that the Government of Canada intends to require vaccinations across the federal public service. Following this example, we also expect that Crown corporations and other employers in the federally regulated sector will also require vaccination for their employees for the same compelling reasons. Furthermore, as soon as possible in the fall and no later than the end of October, the Government of Canada will require employees in the federally regulated air, rail, and marine transportation sectors to be vaccinated. In addition, the vaccination requirement will also extend to certain travelers. This includes all commercial air travelers, passengers on interprovincial trains, and passengers on large marine vessels with overnight accommodations, such as cruise ships. Of course, for those few who are unable to be vaccinated, accommodation or alternative measures, such as testing and screening, may be determined in each situation to protect broader public health by reducing the risk of COVID-19. I've heard from employers in the federal transportation sector who are concerned about protecting their employees. Workers are counting on their employers to develop robust vaccination policies for their workplaces. Vaccine requirements in the transportation sector will help protect the safety of employees, their families, passengers, their communities, and all Canadians. And more broadly, it will hasten Canada's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen how devastating COVID-19 has been to our transportation and tourism sectors. We must protect the hard-won gains made by Canadians. Canadians deserve to feel confident when traveling that the environment around them is safe. We need to regain public confidence in travel. Such confidence will give a boost to our industry. Being vaccinated makes the workplace and travel safer for everyone. We will work closely with key stakeholders, operators, and bargaining agent in particular to develop a practical approach to requiring vaccines in these sectors as quickly as possible. As I noted, the health and safety of Canadians will always be our first and most important priority. La santé et la sécurité.
The health and safety of Canadians will always be our first priority.
My fellow Canadians, next time you get on a bus to go to work, hop on a ferry, take a train or fly to another Canadian city, or any number of other industries public service employees are part of, remember, they work hard to serve you every day. Let's protect ourselves and each other by getting vaccinated. I want to thank Canadians for their continued cooperation in the face of the global COVID-19 pandemic. Canadians want to get back to normal as quickly as possible. Those who get vaccinated will pose less risks to themselves and their fellow Canadians. Because of this, they will be able to benefit from additional easing of public health measures. To those who have not been vaccinated yet, know that vaccines are our best way out of this pandemic. Please go get your shot. We're not quite there yet, but by continuing to work together, we will end this fight. Thank you. Merci. And now I will ask my friend and colleague, Jennifer O'Connell, to take the mic.
Thank you, Omar and Dominic, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking Canadians for their commitment to fighting COVID-19. We know vaccines are key to beating COVID-19. And while we still need to practice public health measures, particularly in crowded and indoor spaces, vaccines have allowed us to reconnect with loved ones and return to many of the activities missed during the pandemic. They are also essential to ensuring the safety of our employees. And this is why the federal government is committed to protecting the health and safety of all Canadians. Vaccine requirements across the public service reflect that commitment. Required vaccination also sets an example for everyone, including other public and private sector employers. This will help keep our country safe and contribute to stopping the spread of COVID-19 and its variants. As we face the fourth wave of this pandemic in Canada, it is more important than ever to bring down COVID-19 infection rates, and we have enough doses to fully vaccinate every eligible person in Canada, and it is important that everyone does their part to increase the vaccination uptake. So if you haven't been vaccinated yet, I urge you to make a plan to do so. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it back to Minister LeBlanc.
Jennifer, thank you very much. And Jean-Sébastien, over to you. We're obviously, all three of us, happy to take questions now. Jean-Sébastien, à vous.
Over to you, Jean-Sébastien.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Donc, tel que...
Thank you very much, Minister. We will now take questions.
The Parliamentary Secretary will now be happy to take your questions. As usual, it will be one question and one follow-up per reporter. Donc, comme d'habitude, ça va être...
As usual, there will be one question and one follow-up question per reporter.
I'll hand it over to the operator for the first question. Donc, je vais maintenant passer la parole.
I will now hand it over to the operator for the first question.
Merci, thank you.
Thank you.
Please press star 1 at this time to ask a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur l'étoile 1 mais...
Please press star 1 now to ask a question.
The first question is from Nicole Thompson of the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks, ministers. I'm wondering what will happen to the federal employees who choose not to get vaccinated.
So it's Dominic LeBlanc. I'll be happy to offer some comments, and if my colleagues want to add something, I would obviously hope they do. This is a mandatory requirement for the federal public service. Obviously, there will be certain individuals for medical reasons that will not be able to be vaccinated, and the appropriate officials will obviously work with them to ensure that the appropriate measures are in place for those, as I say, who medically cannot be vaccinated, cannot accept a vaccination. But we expect the federal public service to want to comply with this mandatory requirement. We obviously, many people across the government of Canada have worked long days and many weekends precisely to help bring vaccines to Canada, to distribute them to provinces and territories, to work with provincial and territorial authorities to distribute these vaccines. So the government of Canada has been focused on vaccination and obviously believes, as do so many people that work with us, that this is the best way to end the pandemic and to allow for the economy to safely remain open. So we expect compliance from the federal public servants, and we'll obviously work with the appropriate bargaining agents to ensure that there can be the best way possible to ascertain these vaccination requirements. But we'll do so expeditiously. We're going to move very quickly to get this done. Maybe Jennifer or Omar want to add something?
Let me start and then see if Jennifer wants to add something. In my former role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister for Public Service Renewal, I had the privilege of engaging and working with so many public servants across the entire government. And now in my role as Minister of Transport, I've really seen firsthand the commitment and the dedication that public servants have had for serving Canadians. And my sense is that public servants are supporting and applauding this commitment, and they all want to ensure that they have a safe workplace. Of course, there will be some requirements for accommodation based on legitimate reasons, and those will be worked out. But my sense is that public servants are very much applauding and supporting this initiative.
I will add, this is Jennifer O'Connell, I'll add that millions of Canadians have already stepped up to receive their vaccines, and that includes many public servants. So we thank them for doing so. We know vaccines are safe and effective, but as my colleagues have already pointed out, this is about ensuring as an employer that we also are creating safe workplaces for our employees and making sure that employees feel comfortable and safe going to work. And as it's already been said, of course, there will be accommodations for people who cannot receive the vaccine for medical reasons, but this is yet another step for those individuals who can't receive that vaccine to ensure that they themselves are in a safe workplace to help that they're not more vulnerable and are able to, again, have a safe workplace. So millions of Canadians have stepped up, and we just want to ensure that we go one step further to ensure that we are leading or taking the leadership role in this country to ensure that all employees feel safe going to work.
And did you have a follow-up?
Yes. But what about those who are able to get vaccinated but decide for, philosophical or religious reasons? I mean, maybe not religious, but who don't believe in vaccination. What will happen to those who choose not to get vaccinated?
But again, those will be cases that will be dealt with individually by the appropriate public service managers. But what we're saying to the federal public service is this is now a mandatory requirement to go to work in a federal workplace or to work for the government of Canada. And Omar, I think, outlined other federally regulated jurisdictions in which we will be also mandating this requirement. We expect the Crown corporations and federal agencies will also come to the Treasury Board with their plan to ensure that their workplaces are also safe. So we're not focused on those questions. We're focused on how to properly ensure that proof of vaccination is tendered by the public servants who have been vaccinated to work with unions, bargaining agents, and others. But public service managers will also be in a position to deal with employees that decide not to respect the mandatory requirement.
Thank you, Minister LeBlanc. And I will now hand it over to the moderator for the next question. Donc, excusez-moi, pas modérateur, opérateur, à vous.
Operator, over to you for the next question.
Merci.
Thank you.
The next question, la prochaine question est de Claudie Côté.
Next question, Claudie Côté from TVA. Question. Hello. I'd like clarification about something, please. I'd like to know when vaccination will become required. You didn't give us a timeline yet. Also, what is the current vaccination rate among federal public servants? Do you happen to know that? Answer. Minister LeBlanc. Well, for some industries and sectors, for example, transportation, as my colleague, Minister Alghabra, just spoke to, he said that this will take effect no later than the end of October. So no later than the end of October, regulation measures will be enforced in order to ensure that these individuals are vaccinated. We will start to work with companies in the sectors named by the Minister of Transport. We don't currently know the vaccination rates for federal public servants. We don't know what % of them are fully vaccinated, but we expect that it's a very high vaccination rate because, as I mentioned, these men and women, these employees have worked so incredibly hard to serve Canadians and to help them get vaccines. Also, public servants have been working, many of them, in person since the beginning of the pandemic. For example, in some transportation sectors or in healthcare. These employees know, just as we do, that the best way to protect their loved ones, family, friends, communities is to get vaccinated. But of course, the SCT will work with the Treasury Board will work with the public service and with public servants in the upcoming weeks to determine how many people have been vaccinated and to help those and encourage those who have not been vaccinated to do so. And we will get started with this as soon as next week. Follow-up question. What will you do for those who refuse to be vaccinated? We cannot use that as a ground for discrimination in the workplace. That would be illegal. Will there be accommodation measures for those employees who would refuse? For example, will they be required to be tested on a daily basis? And you mentioned when this will take effect for those who work in transportation, but what about for other federal public servants? When will this take effect for them? Answer, Minister LeBlanc. We expect that for the broader public service, this should be at the same timeline around October. This is a good question. We will start discussing this and studying this on Monday. The Treasury Board will start meeting with unions and public service representatives as soon as next week. We will thus very soon have more details regarding the timeline of when this vaccination will become mandatory. As we've mentioned, there will be some exceptions. For example, those who, for medical reasons, cannot be vaccinated. We will find ways to accommodate them. As Ms. McConnell said, the best way to protect them is to ensure that the people around them who work with them are fully vaccinated. We are confident that federal public servants, as well as employees of Crown corporations, will adhere to this requirement. And those who manage various government groups and agencies will have the tools to ensure that people are fully vaccinated.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Donc, opérateur, à vous pour la prochaine question. Operator, to you for the next question.
Merci, thank you. The next question is from John Paul Tasker of CBC News. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, ministers. Thanks for doing this. For Minister LeBlanc, the Prime Minister was asked about mandatory vaccinations in January. He said that this sort of regime would be, quote, an extreme measure and would have real divisive impacts on community and country. The Health Minister, Patty Hajdu, made similar comments as well, saying that no vaccines would be mandatory. So I guess the question is, what's changed and why are we seeing this sort of climb down today from past comments?
So I'll offer some comments, and Omar and Jennifer may want to add something, Jean-Paul, but I obviously wouldn't describe it as a climb down. This is an evolution of the government's posture in protecting the health and safety of Canadians since the beginning of the pandemic. We have scientific data, but also real-world evidence on how remarkably effective are the vaccines that have been approved for use by Health Canada. So after months and months of deploying these vaccines literally into millions and millions of Canadian arms, we see how effective they are. We also see what other workplaces and other public service agencies around the world have done. And the Prime Minister asked the Clerk of the Privy Council to prepare options for the government on what a mandatory federal public service vaccination plan would look like. And that is exactly what we are announcing today. So it is very much a continuation of our government's efforts to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to protect the health and safety of Canadians. We think the Government of Canada has to lead by example. It's the country's biggest employer. We're also asking federally regulated industries, and they are also some of the largest private sector employers in the country, to take similar measures. And we'll be working collaboratively with them over the coming weeks as well. We see this as, frankly, a very important step, particularly with the Delta variant, for example, being more transmissible. Fully vaccinated Canadians are much, much more effectively protected than those that aren't. So this is a continuation of that effort that began, obviously, in March of last year. Omar or Jennifer may want to add something.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. I'll just add to what you said is that, from the beginning, our government has been focused on working with the provinces, on supporting our frontline health workers, and providing vaccine supplies, and providing PPEs. And we're seeing that organically, significant vaccination rates have been produced. Over 81% of Canadians, adult Canadians, have received one dose, and 70% have been fully vaccinated. So we can see that we are, hopefully in the final few miles of this marathon, and we need to do additional measures to incentivize and to close this gap, to continue on this momentum, so we can protect the health and safety of all Canadians, and actually protect as well the hard-won gains to our economy, to our sectors. We cannot afford to risk losing all of those gains.
Perhaps I will just add, I think our government, and certainly the Minister of Health, as I've worked closely with her, the commitment has always been the safety and the protection of Canadians. So wherever COVID has taken us, we have been committed to find the solutions to keep Canadians safe. And we know that vaccines are safe and effective. We also know, with variants of concerns, that vaccinations are still working and provide that level of protection that we need. And that, I think most importantly, vaccines not only keep yourself safe, but they keep your friends and neighbors safe. And that if we want to continue to return to life as normal, if we want to continue to support small businesses, to ensure that they can stay open and thrive and continue to travel and do all the things that I know Canadians are excited to continue to do, the best way to fight COVID-19 and to ensure that we have those opportunities, that we can see our loved ones, that we can hug each other again, is to continue to get vaccinated. So as my colleagues have said, we know that millions of Canadians have stepped up. We are taking a leadership role to not only create safe workplaces for our own employees, but it's also to set the example for Canadians to continue to step up, protect themselves, but protect our country and our communities.
As you might have seen, this message was kind of telegraphed last week when the Prime Minister mentioned it. There has been some opposition criticism of it. David Yerdiga, who's a Conservative MP from Alberta, said forcing federal workers to get a vaccine is a tyrannical idea. He said Canadians deserve the right to choose whether to be vaccinated or not. And mandating vaccines like this is a slippery slope. He's fearful that it could be discriminatory, creating two classes of Canadians, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. What's your response to some of those concerns raised by this opposition MP?
I certainly don't think it'll surprise you that we don't agree with much of what Mr. Yerdiga says. So we'll give that all the weight it deserves. But we have taken a prudent approach, but we've also taken, we think, an effective approach to protect the health and safety of Canadians. We recognize that vaccines are by far the most effective weapon in the fight against COVID-19. And we think the federal public service and Crown agencies and Crown corporations want to do the right thing to protect their employees, but the communities in which they operate. So we expect a constructive but collaborative conversation with bargaining agents, with unions. And frankly, that's been the history of our work with the public service since the beginning of the pandemic. So we are very grateful and recognize the enormous work done by the public servants, including by their unions and their bargaining agents, in finding the best way that we could all serve Canadians in the best way possible during an unprecedented time. So this next step of mandatory vaccinations, we think, is an evolution of that posture to do what's necessary to protect Canadians. But Jennifer or Omar may want to add something.
Yeah, I just want to add, Dominic, you know what Canadians don't want? Canadians don't want to go back to lockdowns. Canadians don't want to go back to travel restrictions. Canadians want to go on with their lives and go back to normal as quickly as possible. And you know, it's not uncommon for a government to play a regulatory role when it comes to protecting the overall health and safety of Canadians. There are ample evidence of different measures that different levels of government regulate to ensure this protection of the safety of Canadians. And this is another example of how the government has a role, and it also demonstrates how much of a difference it makes, the policies that government make to improving the lives of Canadians. So we fundamentally disagree. Canadians expect this from their government, and we think it is the responsible and the prudent thing to protect the health and safety of all Canadians.
Thank you, ministers. Operator, over to you for the next question. Opérateur, à vous pour la prochaine question.
Merci. La prochaine question est de Catherine Lévesque.
Next question, Catherine Lévesque from La Presse Canadienne. Go ahead. Question. Hello, everyone. Before I ask my questions, I'd like to say that we're not hearing you in French on CPAC, so I missed a few minutes of your announcement, Mr. Leblanc. So there will be required vaccination for federal public servants, but when it comes to federally regulated sectors, it's strongly encouraged. Is that correct? Answer, Minister Leblanc. Thank you for asking for clarification. I'm happy to clarify because this is very important. So yes, as you said, this will be required for federal public servants. We will work with Crown corporations and federally regulated sectors. For example, Canada Post, Radio-Canada, and other Crown corporations. We will work with them to ensure that they have the means to do what is necessary when it comes to vaccination of employees. The Minister of Transport did, in fact, list specific transportation sectors and types of passengers for whom vaccination will be mandatory. We will be regulating this.
Precise details in terms of those federally regulated sectors. We're not talking about Crown corporations. We're talking about private businesses, but regulated by the Government of Canada in certain sectors. Omar, do you want to clarify that?
Yes, Dominic, we are requiring federally regulated employers to adjust their rules to ensure that a mandate is imposed by no later than the end of October. So we will be working with employers on defining the new regulatory framework to ensure that all employees and a number of travelers will be fully vaccinated by no later than the end of October.
OK, parfait. Merci beaucoup pour les précisions.
Thank you for clarifying. Here is my first question for you, Minister Leblanc. Mr. Trudeau said just last week, in fact, that he would ask the Privy Council clerk to look into this matter. When did the clerk of the Privy Council provide her decision on this? Were there consultations? Was there a report? Answer, Minister LeBlanc. I worked with Ms. Charette, the clerk of the Privy Council. I've worked with her on many files. She is a very thorough individual and hardworking as well. She had many conversations about this within the Federal Public Service. The Privy Council provided options to the government, and today's announcement is the result of that discussion and those decisions, and hence today's announcement. Follow-up question for you, Mr. Alghabra. Why wait until the end of October to enforce these measures? The fourth wave is already here.
Thank you for your question. This matter, obviously, today we're signaling to the industry, to federal employees that we want to do it as soon as possible. So the deadline of end of October is a deadline to get us there, but we are starting working on it as of Monday. This is going to require a lot of discussions with stakeholders, with employers, with unions, and we know that they all support this measure. We've spoken, I personally heard from airports, from airlines, from unions that they support this measure. We now need to get to work, define the proper regulatory framework and the proper regimes for this. But end of October is the latest date that we want to get there. We are hoping and aiming to do it even sooner.
Thank you, ministers. Operator, over to you for the last question. Donc, opérateur, à vous pour la dernière.
Operator, over to you for the last question.
Merci, thank you. La dernière question is from Sophia Harris of CBC News. Please go ahead.
Some private businesses which want to implement a vaccination requirement for workers say they're waiting for federal legislation or guidance before doing so. Is that coming at all?
I'll offer a few comments, and maybe Omar or Jennifer can add something. The Government of Canada obviously has jurisdiction in terms of private employers. We're not talking about the Federal Public Service, but in terms of private sector employers, our jurisdiction is in certain sectors of the economy, well-known, transport, obviously, banking, telecommunications. Those are the obvious examples of where the Government of Canada has a jurisdiction in terms of those workplaces. So we will also be working with those businesses and their employees to see how they too can ensure that their workplaces are safe and that they're protecting Canadians as well. But a great number of employment relationships are governed by provincial law and provincial labor codes and employment standards legislation in individual provinces obviously vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And those questions we would invite provincial leaders to take up with employers as well. But that's not properly part of our federal ability to legislate or to enact regulatory measures. We can enact regulations under existing legislation, and that's exactly, I think, what Omar is doing, for example, in the transportation sector, but he may want to add something, or Jennifer as well.
Yeah, Dominic, thank you. And just to elaborate or add to what Minister LeBlanc has said, in addition to the importance of what we're announcing today, we're also setting a leadership example to other industries, to other sectors. So yes, we have certain jurisdictions over certain industries, and this is what we're working on starting today. We hope that other sectors will follow our example and set a similar standard for their employees and their workplaces. Ultimately, again, we want to protect against losing all the gains that we've made. We want to protect against going back to lockdowns. We want to protect against losing jobs that we've seen during travel restrictions and other type of restrictions. We want to build on the significant gains that we've made so far. We're almost there. 82% of Canadians have received their first dose. We need to finish this race, and I know we will get there as soon as possible. Thank you.
I'll just add very quickly to what Minister LeBlanc and Minister Alghabra just said. But I think from health perspective, throughout this pandemic, even when it might be provincial or territorial jurisdiction, we have been, frankly, we've even working directly with local public health units. So if there are opportunities to provide advice and guidance, the Public Health Agency of Canada, Health Canada, we are there to support them in whatever they need. We have seen recent announcements, even, for example, universities coming out with vaccine protocols. And so although we may not have regulatory jurisdiction over all of these industries, certainly Health Canada and the minister's priority has been to it has been committed to working with them to provide the best public health advice that we can, and in any ways that we can support provinces and territories in taking the regulatory measures that they need to take in their jurisdictions.
Thank you very much, Parliamentary Secretary and Ministers. Donc voilà qui met fin à cette conférence de presse. That will conclude today's press conference. Merci d'avoir été parmi nous. Thank you for joining us today.
Merci beaucoup.